Hi, my name is Vanessa and I'm 16 years old. Tell me, have you ever regretted where you were born and who your parents were? Would you have liked to have a choice before you were born? I'd give anything for that. A lot of people are unlucky in life, and I've been unlucky since I was born. Watch this video to the end and you will learn how after being born into a poor family, you can become the president of your country. I was born in a very poor family. My parents barely had enough to eat, so they spent all their time at work. My mother was a cleaner at a local hospital for the poor, and my father was a parking attendant at a supermarket. There was no money for school, so I was entrusted with the upbringing of my younger brother. We lived in a poor neighborhood, and it seemed that everyone was happy with everything except me. People didn't want to change anything and were content with what they had, and that made it even worse. My peers did not want to learn. They just wandered around the street doing nothing and engaged in petty theft. That's why I didn't have much contact with them. And I spent all my free time reading books that I found in a landfill and watching news and political programs on TV. I had always been interested in that. Therefore, I try to understand the topic so that one day I would stand in power and change inequality in society. My younger brother, Richard, didn't share my love of politics and change. I kept telling him not to mess with the bad guys, but Richard never listened to me and joined a local gang of hooligans. When one gets everything and you get nothing? One day, the police called us and told us that he was at their station. When we got there, we found him sitting behind bars. He didn't want to tell us what happened, but the police officer told us. It turned out that his so-called friends persuaded him to help with the theft of a phone. When an expensive car was passing by, they pretended that one of them had been run over. And while the driver was figuring out what was going on, Richard had to steal the phone from the car. But the driver understood and caught Richard, and his friends ran away. The police let my brother go, but my parents had to pay all the money we had. I was incredibly angry with my brother. I warned him. He knew how difficult life was for us. So when he came to apologize, I turned away from him and decided not to talk to him anymore. Let him live as he liked if he didn't listen to my advice. It was evening. As always, I was watching a political program when I suddenly heard my parents talking. Neighbors had already given the second child to an orphanage because there was nothing to feed them with. It was cruel to the child. Why couldn't he live with his parents? And why wouldn't anyone give them some money so they could get their children back? It was at this moment that I heard the president's speech on the news. She announced a competition for aspiring journalists. It was necessary to write a socially significant article on one of the most important topics of our time. And the best part was that anyone could participate. I knew immediately that I had to participate. Finally, I would be able to prove myself, achieve something, and get out into the world. And most importantly, the winner would receive a monetary reward. This meant that I could move to a nicer neighborhood and start my life with a clean slate. I decided to write an article on social inequality. The deadline was 1 month, so I threw myself into the work. My parents couldn't keep track of my brother because of work, so they told me not to fill my head with useless articles and dreams, but to help around the house. It made me angry. How could they think so narrowly? I told them that working for a penny was useless and we needed to act decisively if we wanted to change something. A month passed. I gave up on them, on my brother, on the house, and I was busy with my article all the time. During this time, the neighbors gave another child to a shelter, and this was the last straw. I finally decided that I could no longer stay in this terrible place, and in my head I already imagined a nice house, nice neighbors, and a refrigerator full of food. When I finished the article, I went to the admissions office to submit it for review. I could have used the computer, but I didn't have one. And there, it turned out terrible. To participate in the competition, you didn't just need to submit an article, we needed to go public with it, with a witness. I used the case of Richard as an example in my article, so he could be the only witness. But I hadn't spoken to him in over a month. During this time, he began to communicate with those guys again and completely went out of hand. But I decided to try. I went up to him and asked him to be my witness. But instead of helping, I got a conviction. He became indignant and thought that I wanted to tell everyone about his shameful crime. But it was his own fault, wasn't it? What difference would it make if he embarrassed himself or not, if it helped me? When he heard this, he took offense and ran away from home. Have you ever used your loved ones for your own purposes? I had been looking for him for days, but to no avail. Desperate, I decided to go to the police for help. And when I got there, I saw a terrible picture. My brother was back in prison. But this time, he was bruised and covered in blood. Terrified, I grabbed the bars and asked what had happened. But he sat in a corner and said nothing. Then the police officer said that Richard tried to steal equipment in a household store, but the guards caught him and beat him. I begged the captain to let my brother out, but the captain said, no money, no freedom. All I could do was go home. And there was an unexpected surprise waiting for me. My article was approved and I made it to the final, which was today. I immediately ran to the contest. On the way, I realized that I was in my beggar's clothes with disheveled hair and not washed. When I got there, I tried to clean myself up, but it didn't get any better. There were rich kids in the competition, and they made me look like trash. It was my turn. I went to the podium and started reading my article. I was ashamed of the way I looked and the fact that my only witness was sitting in the police station, so I tried not to look in the crowd. I didn't want to see people judging and laughing at me. I felt so sorry for myself that I couldn't stand it and decided to just tell my life story. About a poor family, about neighbors, about a brother in prison. I didn't care about the contest anymore. I just wanted to talk. After finishing the story, the audience stood up and began to applaud me for a long time. And in the end, I won because I spoke from the heart and noticed what others did not notice. After all, unlike others, I knew firsthand about social inequality, so the topic was very close to me. After receiving the money, I immediately ran home. Along the way, I imagined packing up, moving to another area, buying a house there, going to university, and how my life became beautiful. But when I entered the house, I saw my parents sobbing with grief. My brother urgently needed surgery. During the beating, he got a concussion and blood got into his brain. But we already spent all the money on buying him out the first time. So the only way out was to move out of the apartment on the street and give the money for rent to the operation. At that moment, I realized that how could I change the whole world if I couldn't deal with problems in my family and neighborhood? So I gave part of the money to get my brother released for treatment in the hospital, and I gave the other part to the neighbors to take their children, making them promise that they would find work and feed their sons. I was back in the same position as I was in the beginning, without money or changes. But I wasn't going to give up. I gathered all my peers and asked them to help clear the area of garbage so that it did not look like a garbage dump. It was the only thing I could do. Surprisingly, the kids agreed. We spent a whole week doing it with the sweat of our brows. A local newspaper noticed this and wrote an article about how poor teenagers helped the state on their own initiative. So the authorities found out about our activities and allocated money for work. After this article, the kids started calling me our president. That's when I realized that to fix the whole world, you first need to start with yourself and your environment. After all, they are the world that surrounds me. I took care of my brother's upbringing and offered him and his gang to clean up garbage in the area for a small fee, so that they would not even have thoughts of stealing. They agreed with pleasure because they had never been paid before. I was invited to work as a journalist for a local student newspaper. They read the article that I prepared for the contest and they liked it very much. So now, I will earn money and help my family. If you like the video, please like and subscribe to our channel. And remember to start small.
Hi, I'm Zoe, and I'm 16 years old. Have you ever felt like an outcast in society? When you are shunned and even afraid of what would you do if you were bullied and laughed at because of your appearance? Watch this video to the end, and you will learn how to live with an ugly face. You rarely think about the fact that appearance can affect your life so much, especially when you like your own. Every day, I received compliments, and all the friends of my parents were touched by seeing me and cherished my beauty. After all, my mother is a cosmetologist, and my father is a plastic surgeon. And of course, people who create beauty had the most beautiful child. I was actively involved in cheerleading, was one of the most popular girls in school, and even ran for school president. I had a handsome boyfriend, David. Almost all the girls wanted to be me, and I enjoyed it. My life was just a fairy tale that ended after that day. I was driving to school with my boyfriend. We had fun chatting and not really watching the road. I never used a seatbelt because I thought that nothing bad would happen to me. But suddenly, a car flew out at us, and David lost control of his car. Suddenly, I felt a huge force that threw us to the side of the road. I felt the shards of glass bite into my face, and it felt numb. Have you ever been in an accident? Then you understand that I was in a state of shock at the time, so I don't remember much. My face was healing for a month, and I had to walk around with my head completely bandaged. I felt a daily cutting pain. Every day was unbearable. I thought it was the worst thing that could have happened to me in all the time, until my bandages were removed. For the first time since the accident, I went to the mirror to look at myself and felt a shock. The scars were so deep that they left terrible marks on my face, as if someone had just slashed me with a knife and left me like this. Because the skin was covered with scars, its color no longer perfectly even, but resembled burns, and the whole picture was completed by my no longer perfect nose with a hump, which could only be hidden by a burqa. Was it really me? No. I was looking at a completely different person. Now I looked like a real freak from a horror movie. The whole face was horribly scarred and marked. The eyebrows were disfigured and left in shreds, and the eyes were full of fright. It wasn't me anymore. There was no trace of the last beauty left. I came home and just locked myself in my room. I didn't go out for several days, and I didn't want to eat or drink. I broke all the mirrors in my room because I just couldn't look at myself. Tears stung my face because of recent wounds. I felt terrible. My sweet and beautiful face turned into this, and now I had to live with it. My parents tried to support me. I was scheduled for a hospital checkup in a week to see if I had any complications, so we tried to talk less about it. One evening, I overheard my dad talking on the phone with a doctor. He was talking about me. I couldn't stand it. I ran up to ask if there was anything I could do with my ugly face. My father promised me that he would do everything possible to get me back to normal. My dad knew a surgeon who could help me. I began to believe that I would be able to look at my reflection in the mirror again. But on my checkup, my hopes were dashed. The doctor said that even the smallest surgical interventions should not be performed now. Everything inside me collapsed. The sick day was almost over, and I had to go to school soon. which was my worst nightmare. I had already seen school children shy away from me, get scared, and call me names. No one saw me on sick day except my parents, but thousands of eyes would see me at school. When Day X arrived, I wanted the ground to swallow me up just so that no one would notice me. As soon as I opened the school door, I realized that I was no one here anymore. My popularity was gone. David didn't even talk to me. And all my friends seemed to support me, but behind my back they laughed and came up with the offensive nickname, Freddie. I huddled in the corner between the lockers and sobbed there. But one girl I used to bully came up to me and supported me. It was unexpected, so I just pushed her away and ran away. Each new day was even harder. I tried to apply a ton of makeup, but it didn't save my face, and the patches didn't help either. So I started covering my face with my hair, pushing it forward, putting on my hood, and slouching. But it didn't get any better. Everyone was laughing at me and calling me names. But that girl, she supported me, and over time, we started communicating. Her name was Sally. I didn't understand why she was doing this, but thanks to her, I began to smile more often. After a month, I had gradually gained confidence and began to pay less attention to the taunts from the outside. Did they ever laugh at you at school? Then you know exactly how I felt. I tried to continue to live my life, and it seemed like everyone around me had already got used to my appearance. It was easier for me. And then, everything was going downhill again. I was kicked out of the cheerleading team, told that my face scared people away. The boys on the football team refused to support me. It was a real stab in the back. I had been doing this for more than 2 years, and then I got kicked out. I was crushed. On the same day, I was banned from running for president of the school. As soon as I came to terms with the consequences of the accident and the ugly situation at school, I was broken again. I felt the injustice, but I couldn't do anything about it. I no longer tried to do anything to protect myself, as I did not feel the support of others. It became even harder for me to open up and trust people, so I became depressed. I started skipping school and closing myself in my room more and more often. And one of those days, someone knocked on my door. I opened it and saw a courier with a package, signed it, and started unpacking it. I didn't believe what I saw. It was a topical ointment against such damage on the face as mine. I was delighted and immediately smeared it all over my face. I thought the cream would definitely help me. When my dad arrived, I started to hug him and was happy, but he immediately explained that the ointment was experimental, and there were no guarantees for the result. My hopes were dashed again. Was I just going to be ugly forever? I closed the door, went to the mirror, and, choking with tears and resentment, grabbed a piece of scissors and hysterically cut my hair in the bathroom. I decided that if my face always remained like this, at least the image would match. In the room, I found a black and red striped sweatshirt, found black pants and a hat, trying to look like the one whose nickname I was given. This time, I was ready to go to school. When I opened the school door, time seemed to stop in the corridor. Everyone was looking at me. Even though my new image looked terrible, that wasn't the reason. When I got closer to the election counters, I found my own, and behind it stood Sally, who was shouting slogans for me. I thought everyone was laughing at me again and abruptly started ripping flyers off the walls and throwing them in the trash. Sally tried to stop me, but I pushed her away and ran away crying. All eyes were on me. Sally caught up with me and began to calm me down. She explained everything to me. It turned out that all this time, she was negotiating with the principal to allow me to participate in the elections, and he was outraged that I was forbidden to do so. The principal was shocked that I was treated this way, so everyone who voted for my removal was banned from participating in the election. I didn't believe it was real. They really supported me. 2 days ago, the election ended, and thanks to my knowledge and Sally's efforts, I was elected president. For a long time, I was really happy. Performing in front of large crowds helped me reduce my appearance. I don't know what will happen next, but I was happy to participate, and I think I started to feel the ground under my feet again. I try not to think about the accident and try to move on. Did you ever have any problems with your appearance? If so, write your story in the comments, put likes, subscribe to the channel, and have a nice day.
Hi, I'm Karina, and I'm 13 years old. Have you ever thought that you lived the tough life? That you don't deserve such trials and tribulations? That you have too much going on right now? I know that. Watch this video to the end and find out how I had to pretend to be mute to survive. I grew up in the ghetto. Our district had no funding. The government took all the money for itself, and the ordinary people lived slightly worse than poor. For example, my family was supported by alms. I've known since I was 3 what it was like to walk with my hand outstretched. Even as a child, I was given a legend. I was passed off as a mute to arouse people's pity. Naturally, it worked. At first, I was shy about pretending, but then I got used to it. One day, a guy on the street noticed me. He tried to communicate with me by gestures. I didn't understand what he wanted from me. Could he be ill? But I couldn't leave my workplace. In the end, he just wrote a note and left. I read it in the evening. Hi, my name is Hugh. My brother is an activist for the rights of the poor. Do you want me to introduce you to him? Would you talk to someone who promised to get you out of trouble? There are too many crooks in this world to be trusted, I know that. But on the other hand, sometimes you want to believe in the best, right? I threw the paper away and tried not to think about it again. Once we had journalists come to the ghetto, my mother hoped that they would help us crawl out of this hole and gave a big interview. And then the episode with us was simply cut out, and they made it look like there were no beggars in our city at all. Therefore, I did not believe in such activists. Everyone only cares about themselves. However, Hugh appeared the next day, and the next, and the next. He talked to me, asked if I knew sign language, tried to teach me. He said that his brother couldn't do it right now, that I would have to wait a little longer, and then he would come with his entire film crew. I didn't care about his brother, but it was the first time I had a friend from outside the ghetto who cared about me. I wrote to him on a piece of paper that my family was very poor, that our neighborhood was poor and dangerous, that I never went to school because we simply did not have the opportunity. Hugh brought food and candy, and so, thanks to him, I first learned the taste of chocolate. It was just like, I don't have the words. I ate it all by myself without sharing it with my sister. I liked talking to Hugh, mostly because of the food, yes, I won't lie, but not only that. And I had no idea that he remembered his promise. The next day, when I was supposed to go to work, I saw a TV van on the street. My mother and Gertrude followed me out. They also wanted to watch the shooting. I saw Hugh among the camera crew. He also noticed me, was happy, and brought a young man to us. "This is my brother," said Hugh. "Please tell him how you live." Would you lie to get help? Would you cheat for money? I had been lying all my life, and I had already taught myself that this was normal. But now I was as shy as I had been as a kid. Was I afraid of the cameras? Who knew? In short, I was ready to sink through the ground. Then my mother came forward and began to talk about our hard life, about the lack of money, about the fact that we did not go to school, and about the fact that her eldest daughter, me, was mute. I wanted to stop her, but I just couldn't bring myself to speak. After the group left, I asked my mother why she did it, because she, like me, did not believe in television. "Well, we must hope for the best," she told me. And this time, she was not mistaken. The report was shown, though not on TV, but somewhere on the internet. It became very popular, so much so that I was even recognized on the street. A charity account was opened in the name of our family, and we even had money. My mother was happy, and I was terrified. I felt even more ashamed than when I collected alms as a child. I suddenly realized clearly that I was deceiving people and that because of this deception, we were taking money from them. And I would have to keep pretending that I was not talking, maybe even for the rest of my life. I just didn't know what to do. Tell the truth? But we had only just had the opportunity to eat our fill and even buy clothes. I couldn't deprive my mother and Gertrude of the opportunity to live a normal life. But I would give myself away one day. And then what? I decided to take a terrible, desperate step. I decided that I needed to stop lying and at the same time help my family preserve their prosperity. I should have made myself truly mute. But I couldn't. Not because I didn't make up my mind, no. In fact, I was already so depressed that I didn't doubt my decision at all. My mother appeared in the bathroom and started yelling at me. "What are you doing? Stop!" And she snatched the scissors from me. I burst into tears. She tried to calm me down and I ran away from home. To walk, to exhale, to calm down, to make a decision. This helped a little. I eventually came to the conclusion that I had made a fool of myself and I should just wait for the hype to pass. They wouldn't be hurting us all the time, would they? People's attention quickly fades and it was just necessary to buy time. Calming down, I came home and saw a crowd in front of the entrance. Some men in uniform, thank the gods not a police uniform, were knocking on the door. Then they saw me, grabbed me, tried to drag me to the car, trying to calm me down along the way. This, on the contrary, only scared me. I broke away and ran around the back of the house to get in through the window. At home, I met Gertrude crying. What happened? Gertrude, sobbing, told me everything. She was very scared when there was a scandal between my mother and me. Unfortunately, Hugh was not far away. She ran to him for some reason, thinking that I would hide with him. She told him about my fight with my mother. And Hugh... oh, he thought that my mother was using me and tormenting me. Damn. I got mad at my sister and yelled, "Who asked you to do this?" Gertrude started crying even more, and I was wondering what to do. Hugh brought in social services, and now everyone thought that Mom was a family tyrant. Crowds of journalists would flow. Maybe the police would arrive. It had to come, since the daughter almost hurt herself because of her mother. Oh gods, why did this happen? I didn't mean to. Okay, there was no use crying over spilt milk. There was only one way out of the situation, and I had to decide on it. I called Hugh's number from my mother's phone. Yes, I called, not texted. I decided to put an end to this. To say that Hugh was startled was to say nothing. I apologized and asked if I could meet him and talk to him. He agreed. He also brought his brother to the meeting. I let them in through the window and told them the truth. Finally, I said that my mother never made me feel bad. She asked me to lie just so we could survive. Hugh was silent all this time, and I couldn't even look in his direction. I was very ashamed of lying to him. But his brother didn't seem to be offended at all. He just said that we should think about how to make the story public so that we didn't look like crooks. Hugh didn't say anything, or even say goodbye when they left our house. I wasn't surprised. I understood his feeling too well, and it only hurt me to lose such a friend. My mother wasn't arrested. Hugh's brother created another film about our family. It was very difficult to persuade my mother to tell the truth. She was still very afraid of journalists and did not believe that we could be helped selflessly, not out of pity for a disabled child. The film was released with the title Karina's Lie. The documentary story about a girl who lied to other people to save her family became even more popular than the previous film, and for some reason, we even began to get alms even more than before. However, I read various comments on the internet where we were called scammers. Well, I understood why they thought so. After the premiere, Hugh suddenly met me. We took a long walk down our poor trash alley and talked. He admitted that he was offended with me, but now he understood why I did it. All he asked was that I never did it again, and I agreed with him. I realized that I actually had a voice. Instead of taking it away from me, adjusting to an unfair life, I can use it and bring the truth to people. But it's also important to have fun, isn't it? So subscribe to our channel, or maybe you have interesting true stories yourself? Well, we will be happy to hear them.
Hi, I'm Mandy. Have you ever heard a saying that winning fame is simple? You just have to risk everything? Well, I believed it and went through a bit of a hellish time, but here's the full story. I grew up on the outskirts of a small town. Real backwater, a school, couple of stores, police office, prairies about. My mom and dad had a farm. I think my family owned it since the times the dinosaurs roamed the earth. Family business, that was what was in stock for me after school. I wanted to break free, to leave this shabby town, to travel, to get famous. I helped Mom with her chickens and goats since I started walking and helped Dad with crops. My only outlet was my cousin's old guitar. So I graduated. By that time, I played pretty well and knew music sheets, and I thought this was my future. What was there for me as an agricultural major anyway? I decided that with a little cunning, I told my parents that I went to college and went straight for the city. That was my chance to become a musician. I never had a doubt about my potential. Have you ever left everything and moved away like that? As soon as I arrived, I rented a studio to record my first hit. I sent the recording to country producers and waited to wake up famous. A month went by and I didn't get a single reply. Perhaps solo country artists weren't the thing right now. I found another studio, recorded a song with a hired band, much better. Sent it out again. Yet another month went by and I started to run out of money. I wasn't able to pay even for the modest living any longer, and I had two choices. Go home and confess it all to my parents, or get out on the streets. Gosh, I'm such a dumb idiot. I chose the wrong way. I sang on the streets all day long and paid for a hostel with the meager money that I made from tips. When I made close to nothing, I had to sleep in the park. Music was no longer a pleasure for me. I almost hated my guitar. When I had to play hours on end in any weather, I did it just to scrape up a few bucks for food. Once a man approached me. He offered me a job in his bar for a very small wage, but promised me to get me a room to live in. I thought my dreams were coming true, but they didn't, of course. I was just serving drinks, doing dishes, mopping floors. He paid me $400 at the end of the month, but immediately I took $300 for rent. I realized I was a slave. I wasn't really forced into these conditions, but leaving meant going back onto the street. I lived like this for 2 months. In a couple of months, my boss hit on me. I said no, and he kicked me right out. That was the last straw. A guitar, a backpack, and a few bucks I spent on food. Nothing else. I realized it was time to go home. I'll just tell my parents I was kicked out of the university. I tried to make some money for the ticket home, next to the bus stop, but I was told that I'd have to pay a fine. I was in despair. I sat stupefied for the rest of the day. Closer to evening, I saw an elderly lady drop her wallet and not notice it. Here it was, my salvation. I jumped to grab the wallet and hid it under my sweatshirt, but seeing the old lady looking for her wallet to buy a ticket, I became ashamed. Did the city really turn me into a monster? From a country girl, I gave her back her wallet. She thanked me, gave me a few bucks. I cried in gratitude and the woman asked me what the matter was. I told her and she said, "Oh, silly you, call your parents right this minute." She even gave me her phone. They weren't mad at me. As soon as they learned I was on a bus station in the city with no money, they were so worried they couldn't even stay angry. I was so happy to hug them again. I was so ashamed that I stayed put for a few months, helped them around the farm. Read books to enroll into an agriculture course for real right now. Then Mom found a few nameless CDs among my things, and I remembered the recordings and demos I made. They weren't bad at all. My parents liked them too, and suddenly I knew there's a small radio station in our town. I sent my CDs there and I heard my songs on air that very evening. Our own singer in our town, our backwater town. That was big news for them. I never expected such feedback. The radio station was pelted with calls and emails, and they even invited me to be a guest at a talk show one evening. I talked about my adventures, and then kids from a neighboring town found me through the radio. They had their own band and were happy to ask me to sing with them. It's not like we're world famous or anything, but we get around and people know us. And if I learned something from my farm life, it's never give up on work. So we have a long way to go. I suppose with a bit of thinking, it's still possible to find yourself. Have your dreams ever come true in an unexpected way like mine? Please share your stories in comments below and subscribe to our channel to know when we post something new. Like our story if you're also into creativity and can relate to a country girl like me. Have a great day and may your creative experience be a positive one.
Hi, my name is Christy. Have you ever had a lot of money in your hands? Maybe you received a large inheritance or a gift from rich relatives? This happened to me. I became rich at 15 years old. Watch this video to the end and you will learn what difficulties come with wealth and how to deal with them. It so happened that I never knew my parents. Since I was a baby, I was raised in an orphanage. I was lucky. We had very kind teachers and good kids. We were all one close-knit family. When someone was picked up, which was very rare, we all got very bored and, if possible, continued to communicate. I lived in this place for 15 years, and I didn't even think about the possibility that someone might adopt me. But one day, a rich married couple came to us. They could not have children and wanted to take a child from the orphanage. Moreover, they wanted to take an older child to avoid the worries associated with young children. So their choice fell on me. I met with them, and it seemed to me that they were good people. And besides, they were also very rich, which meant that I would live in comfort. A couple of weeks later, I moved into their house. It was a huge 3-story cottage in the center of our city. I got my own huge room, a computer, a game console, and delicious food. I was also given large amounts of pocket money. I was so thrilled. Have you ever had a situation where you suddenly got everything you wanted? However, as time went on, I began to realize that things were not as smooth as I thought. At some point, they started talking to me in an irritated and cold way. If I did something wrong, they would start swearing at me, accusing me of being careless. At first, I thought it would pass with time, but the number of claims only increased. I was tired of putting up with it, so I decided to ask what it was all about. At dinner that night, I told them that I had noticed how often they were angry with me, and I wanted to find out what was wrong. They started saying that everything was fine, but I was not satisfied with this answer. I told them it would be better for everyone if we discussed it. But they were only more angry at my words. After another question, my father flared up and launched into a tirade about how bad I was behaving. My mother supported his every word. After another argument, they took away my pocket money and sent me to my room. I pretended to obey, and then I slipped out of the house to meet my friend from the orphanage named Robin. We agreed that we would meet in the city park. When we met, he said that he had bad news. The orphanage was running out of money. The city's funding was not enough, and if this went on, the orphanage would be closed. I asked what would happen to the kids. Robin replied that they would be distributed to other orphanages in the nearest cities. This was terrible. All the kids were so attached to each other, it would hurt them very much if they were separated. In addition, it was not known whether house mothers in other orphanages were as kind as we had. I promised Robin that I would try to help the orphanage in any way I could. The next day, I went to my foster father and told him about the orphanage situation. I hoped that he, being rich enough, would help the orphanage where I grew up. My father understood me completely wrong. He started accusing me of getting money out of him and that I didn't understand how hard it was for him to get it. As a result, he forbade me to see the children from the orphanage, saying that this would prevent me from becoming a full member of society. I was upset, but I didn't give up. I started thinking about how else I could help the orphanage. I decided to go to work, but there was a problem. All the ads that I watched were looking for people not under the age of 16. Finally, I came across an ad for a leaflet distributor that didn't specify the minimum age. I called them, and they took me right away. I started going to work every day after school. They didn't pay much, but I had to do something. What would you be willing to work 6 hours after each school day for? One day, I saw two men. I recognized them as friends of my foster parents. They just waved and walked past me, and I didn't even care. However, a couple of days later, my mother was not home, and my foster father called me over. He was tense and stern. His friends told him that I was handing out leaflets, and he didn't like it very much. He said that I should not waste time on such nonsense and study economics and business theory instead, so that in the future I could take over his business. He didn't even ask me what I wanted to do. He had already decided everything for me. I got mad at him and told him what I thought. I told him that he was doing nothing to me and had no right to tell me what to do. It made him mad. He started shouting at me, accusing me of being ungrateful and saying that I had to listen to him because I was his daughter. I wasn't going to bend, so I answered him. I called him a greedy, violent lunatic who would never be my father. At that moment, I got a slap in the face. My father, who had slapped me, stood panting, his face red with anger. I was in so much pain, not physically, but mentally, that I started to cry. He also demanded that I didn't tell anyone about it, threatening to ruin my life if I did. He said that with his connections, he could easily put me in jail or deprive me of the opportunity to get a normal job. He left, and I went back to my room, crying and trembling with fear. I realized I couldn't stay here any longer. I packed my things at night. But before I left, I had an idea. I thought that my foster father was really a scoundrel, and it would be all right if I took some money from him to take it to the orphanage. I crept into my parents' bedroom and, very quietly, so as to not wake anyone, found his wallet in his bag. Soon I reached the orphanage. I went to the house mother and told her everything that happened. She was shocked and very worried about me. She allowed me to stay at the orphanage despite the fact that she could have problems. I thanked her and gave her the money I had taken from my father. I lied about earning it though. I went to bed, and in the morning I woke up to some screams outside the door. I looked out and saw my father and several police officers, and the house mother was standing in front of them. My father noticed me and pulled me out of the room. He said I would go with him, but I resisted. I broke free and ran away from him to the house mother. The father began to threaten that he would charge the house mother with child abduction, and the police would be on his side. I was terrified. I couldn't figure out if my foster mom knew what he was doing. But I didn't want the house mother to have any problems, so I agreed to go with my father. However, I had a plan. My father was silent all the way home, but I knew I was going to get a lot of trouble at home. He probably noticed the money was missing, and I didn't think he was going to let me get away with it. There was only one thing I needed to do. When we got home, I jumped out of the car and ran quickly to my room. I heard my father following me. I quickly took out my phone, turned on the camera, and put it in an inconspicuous place. Then my father came into the room. Without saying a word, he hit me in the face and then started screaming. I had never been so humiliated. He called me a thief and a bastard. Then he hit me a few more times and left. I was hurt, but I was glad. There was evidence on my phone that he was hitting me. I didn't care about his threats. I was going to sit back. I went to the police and showed them the tape. No amount of connections helped the father avoid being punished for child abuse. He and my mother were deprived of custody of me and forced to pay me monetary compensation. At the trial, I felt sorry for my mother. She didn't seem to know that my father was hitting me, and she was sad that everything had turned out this way. Before this situation, I thought that if I had a lot of money, I would be happier. But now I realize that even with a lot of money, you can be unhappy and angry. I was happy to return to the orphanage, and the compensation my father paid was enough to fix the situation with its budget. Once in the orphanage, I began to appreciate the place even more and began to actively help with the housework and care for babies. Also, working as a promoter, I realized that it was time to think about my future profession, and I decided to devote myself to social work in order to give joy to those who found themselves in a difficult situation like me. If you like the story, subscribe to the channel and put a like, and click the bell icon. This way, you can be the first to watch new stories. All the best to you. Don't let the wealth pass you by.